as well for organising this Lenten mission. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you this evening. Some years ago, Pope Francis said in a homily that the church should be like a field hospital. It's a phrase he's used quite a few times over the years, and it's important because it recognises the way in which Christians are called to be on the front lines, out there on the peripheries of society, bringing the gift of faith to those who need it most. I don't know about you, but when I think about this image of the church as a field hospital, I tend to think of myself as one of the people carrying out the work of healing. As members of the church, we've been given the gift of faith, and now we must go and share it with others. We know about Jesus, and now we've got to go and help others find out about him too. And that's all well and good. However, what I think Pope Francis is challenging us to recognize is that as members of the church, first and foremost, we are all patients in need of healing, patients in the field hospital. Each one of us, no matter who we are or what our status is as much in need of healing as anybody else. Right now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Father Thomas, you're a priest. You hear confessions, you visit the sick and the dying. You clearly have work to do in this field hospital. Well, that is true. As a priest, I have been called to a particular ministry of healing. However, just as a medical doctor can fall ill, priests too are in need of spiritual healing. As a priest, yes, I've been called by God to undertake a very public role in the field hospital. But as a Christian, first and foremost, I am also one of its patients. And I think it's important to recognize this, because in the past, I think there used to be this image of the church as a kind of fortress where sin was kept on the outside and only the holy people could be on the inside. And so maybe some people were thought of as very holy and very close to God, like the saints, or maybe the clergy or the monks and the nuns, the priests. And other people were thought of as sinners and needed to work a lot harder in order to be perfect. I've heard stories of the way in which people, well, the way they tell it, it's like they were practically forced to go to confession every week and list off their mortal sins. And maybe a priest or a nun would give them a telling off. I'm sure you've all heard that classic line, I went to a Catholic university and earned a degree in guilt, or words to that effect. That was not a healthy view of sin. And I think as a result, during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s, lots of people jumped at the chance to leave the church. Lots of people still think that the church is in some way obsessed with sin. In many respects, we've now seen things go in completely the opposite direction. And contemporary society is extremely permissive. And to suggest that there might even be such a thing as sin is, well, probably best not to talk about it. And actually, as a priest, I must be honest, I do find it very hard to bring up the subject of sin. I often feel as though any mention of it might put people off. And I don't want to do that. I want to draw people in. But I think to ignore the reality of sin, I would suggest, is just as unhealthy as obsessing over it. So returning to the doctor-hospital analogy, at some point in life, everybody needs a doctor, be it for a routine checkup or maybe for a more serious condition. We don't need to obsess over our health in order to remain healthy. That would be hypochondria. But at the same time, if we neglect to look after our health, neglect to look after ourselves, we can become very unhealthy. And that that wouldn't be good. Nobody ever says, oh, we mustn't talk about health because it's an awkward subject. If anything, people quite like to talk about their health, and there are countless books and blogs and apps and TV shows that help people to stay healthy. People recognize that it's good to stay healthy and that we need to try and take positive steps to maintain our health. I would like to suggest that the same approach can be taken towards sin. Just as bad health affects the body, sin affects the soul, affects our relationship with God. Not all sin is serious, to quote St. John, but all of us are very much prone to it. And I think we need to take steps in order to preserve ourselves from it. People flock to receive the vaccine, but do they flock to receive God's grace, God's forgiveness? Just like an illness, the reality of sin can be recognized by its symptoms. The symptoms of sin are present all over the world. St. Paul lists a few of them in his letter to the Galatians. I'm just going to read that out to you. He says, there's sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry and sorcery, hatred, discord, jealousy, rage, rivalries, divisions, factions and envy, drunkenness, orgies and the like. Now, I'm sure there aren't too many of us watching this video today who are involved in orgies and sorcery. At least I certainly hope there aren't. But things like envy, jealousy, divisions, perhaps even a little bit of lust, or a little bit of, maybe a bit of selfishness. I'm sure we have all had some degree of experience in these areas. If not, then you really are already a saint, and I think you should be giving the talk. The fact is, if we're honest, everybody experiences these things. And the reason why we experience them is because we live in a fallen world. All have sinned. St. Paul says this in Romans 3:23. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We use the word fallen, I think, because deep down, we know that the human race is capable of so much more. It's as though we've been made for goodness. We've been designed to appreciate and to try and achieve the good. And boy, oh boy, if you look around the world, despite all the sin we can see around us, we can also recognize an incredible capacity, an incredible potential for achieving goodness. Personally speaking, I've been bowled over by the amazing sense of generosity and altruism that people have exemplified during the pandemic. The key workers, the NHS, the teachers, the scientists, all their hard work suggests to me that humanity has this inbuilt capacity to strive towards the good. The difficulty is, no matter how hard we try, and we can see this throughout history, the problem of sin has never disappeared. No matter how much effort we put into trying to establish the reign of justice and peace, somewhere in the world, or somewhere in our own lives, sin keeps on rearing its ugly head. It's as though we were made to achieve goodness, and yet too frequently we experience evil. It's like we struggle to achieve our purpose. And in that sense, we're fallen. And that's exactly what the sacred scriptures teach us. We read about all of this in the book of Genesis. And if you have a Bible to hand, do please follow along with any references I make. Throughout chapter 1, we encounter again and again the following phrase, and it was good. Verse 4, verse 10, verse 12, verse 18, verse 21, verse 25. In all these verses, after the creation of all the various aspects of creation, God says, it was good. God made the world for goodness. And this is true even more so for humanity, whom God makes in his own image. That means we have a share in God's nature. That unlike the other animals, we have a rational soul, which makes us capable of knowing, of processing complex thoughts, and most significantly, of loving. We're made for love. That is our purpose. God creates man and woman so that they may know what it's like to love another person. And not only that, he gives them dominion. The phrase is he gives them dominion, lordship, that is, over the entire creation. God himself is the Lord of creation, and yet he allows us the privilege of sharing in that lordship. And what we read is that having given humanity this dignified position, God says it was very good. You see, humanity is the crowning achievement of God's creation, and it was very good. We are, in God's own words, very good. And chapter 2, verse 8 in Genesis describes how God would walk alongside man and woman. If you look at the Catechism of the Church, paragraph 378, interprets this walking alongside God as a form of solidarity with our Creator. We were in his presence, and we could freely experience the radiance and the beauty of his love. This all changes in chapter 3, where humanity first experiences temptation, which is represented in the story by the evil servant, also known as the devil. In the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus describes the devil as the father of lies. He's a liar because he somehow convinces Adam and Eve that they can become godlike, ironically, by disobeying God. And that's a lie because God has already made us godlike. We already share his image. The devil is offering us something that we already have. And yet, for some reason, we caved in to this temptation to put ourselves first, to put ourselves above the will of God. And the result of this act of rebellion, let's call it, is what we call the fall. The God-given dignity that made our humanity so very good became, from that point onwards, tainted or tarnished, so to speak. Our awareness of God's presence became fuzzy and dulled. Life on earth became toilsome. We read this again a little further on in chapter 3. And in seeing fellow humans no longer as companions, but as rivals and competitors, we began to turn against each other. And we see that in chapter 4 in the stories of Cain and Abel. We all know what happens there. The Genesis story does leave some questions unanswered, like why was there a serpent in the garden at all? Why did God create a tree from which it was forbidden to pick any fruit? I don't know that I'm going to be able to answer those questions. There's no quick answer. Perhaps God wanted to teach us that all of our actions in some ways have consequences. Perhaps he wanted us to learn the art of true love in a world where you have to sacrifice yourself in order to show it. I'm not sure. What is essential is that the Genesis story tries to make sense of the reality that we experience every day. That on the one hand, we have this immense capacity for goodness, and on the other, this awful inability to achieve it because of our sin. And the fact that we're still so attracted to goodness is a reminder that although the whole of creation has become tarnished through sin, we are still made in the image and likeness of God. And because of that, we retain an incredible dignity and value. And God still loves us. As David put it so movingly last week, There is nothing we can do to make God love us more, and there is nothing we can do to make God love us less. We're his flesh and blood. How could he ever stop loving us? And this is why God will never allow evil to have the final word. So in chapter 3, verse 14 of Genesis, God addresses the serpent. This is what he says. Because you have done this, cursed are you above all cattle and above all wild animals. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And this is the important bit. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And what we have here is God making a promise. God promises that one of Eve's descendants, one of her seed, a man, will one day be born. This man will stamp on the serpent's head. In doing this, he too will be bruised. He too will taste the pain of life on fallen earth. But he shall also bring an end to evil and sin. In other words, even though we get things wrong, even though we sin, out of his great love for us, God himself will make things right. Join us next week to find out how Jesus comes to save us.